ancient crime. In ancient Mesopotamia, theft wasn't just common, it was constant. People stole livestock, tools, grain, and even beer. Thieves sometimes waited until religious festivals, when towns were distracted by ceremonies, to break into homes and granaries. Others targeted markets, switching price tags, using rigged weights, or slipping items into their robes. Property crime was everywhere, and it often turned violent. Some killed neighbors over irrigation disputes or inheritance. Revenge killings were especially common among clans, turning minor thefts into years-long blood feuds. Murder also had layers. In cities like Babylon, killings could stem from jealousy, land disputes, or just pure rage. Domestic murders weren't rare. People poisoned rivals or spouses. Sometimes family members staged accidents to cover up crimes. There were also disturbing cases of ritual killings, usually tied to cult practices or royal succession schemes. Criminals didn't just act alone either. Some formed loose groups that coordinated thefts, especially during times of famine or conflict. Egypt had its own problems. Tomb robbing was one of the most notorious crimes, and it wasn't some fringe issue. Entire crews, including guards, craftsmen, and priests, took part. They stripped at tombs of gold, amulets, and ceremonial tools. Robbers sometimes hacked into sealed burial chambers through hidden tunnels, bypassing traps and curses. The state tried to crack down, but even some of the scribes assigned to monitor the tombs took their cut. In cities like Thebes, black markets for stolen burial goods ran for decades, and it wasn't just tombs. Thieves broke into granaries and temples too, especially during periods of weak leadership. Assaults in ancient Egypt often happened over property boundaries, romantic jealousy, or debt. Some criminals lured victims with business deals, then attacked them. There were also traveling tricksters who conned people out of food or animals with fake charms or promises of magic. Fraud, impersonation, and forgery existed early. Criminals sometimes faked tax receipts or land claims to seize property. In ancient Greece, petty theft was a daily issue in crowded markets. People stole fruit, clothing, and jewelry. Some scams involved pretending to be priests collecting for temples. In rural areas, bandits hid along trade routes, ambushing travelers and taking carts or livestock. Violence was common during revolts or food shortages, when mobs looted storage buildings and merchant homes. There were even cases of child stealing, usually to sell into servitude. Rome was still forming, so the real Roman crime wave comes later. Here, it was all about basic survival theft and the stealing grain, tools, and animals. Violence mostly showed up in clan disputes or raids. Even then, the motives were clear: hunger, power, and revenge. Medieval crime. Crime in the medieval world was brutal, constant, and incredibly public. Bandits were everywhere, prowling trade routes, hiding in forests, and attacking travelers with swords, clubs, or anything sharp they could carry. Some worked solo, but plenty formed gangs, robbing merchants, ransoming nobles, or raiding entire villages. Roads between towns were so dangerous, travelers sometimes hired armed escorts just to survive a single day's ride. Inside the towns, theft was non-stop. Pickpockets targeted market stalls, while burglars snuck through alleys and rooftops to loot homes at night. Bakers who used false weights or watered-down beer were charged with fraud and often shamed in front of crowds. There were even reports of people stealing corpses for ransom or blackmail. But the crown jewel of medieval punishment? Public execution, hangings, beheadings, burnings, all done out in the open, usually with a cheering crowd. Criminals were tied to wheels, pulled apart, or displayed in cages. Executions were as much theater as they were justice. Heads of traitors were stuck on spikes and left to rot at city gates. Heretics were burned in church courtyards while bishops stood nearby, reading prayers over the flames. Speaking of heresy, that crime exploded in later centuries. Anyone who questioned the church's authority risked being tortured or killed. The church labeled certain ideas as threats, and once accused, people had almost no way out. Confessions were often forced through horrific means. Accused heretics were stretched, crushed, or bound in iron, and if they didn't talk, they burned anyway. Records show entire towns being investigated at once, with dozens arrested in a single sweep. Witch trials added a whole new layer of paranoia. Midwives, widows, herbalists, anyone slightly unusual could be accused. Some were blamed for storms, sick cows, or spoiled crops. Accusers pointed fingers out of fear, jealousy, or personal grudges. The accused were stripped, searched for devil marks, then thrown into water to see if they floated. If they did, they were guilty. If they sank, well, they drowned. Justice in the feudal system wasn't exactly fair. Lords had their own courts, and what counted as a crime depended on status. A peasant caught stealing bread might lose a hand. A knight could do far worse and walk away with a fine. The law served landowners first, everyone else second. Peasant revolts were also common. When taxes got too high or crops failed, entire villages turned violent. They burned manors, killed tax collectors, and stormed castles. Most were crushed quickly, but not without blood. And then there was the royals' favorite pastime, corruption. Kings took bribes, forged alliances with criminals, or raided treasuries to pay off debts. Crime in medieval times wasn't hiding, it was running the show. Feel free to smash that like and subscribe button for more content like this. Anyways, early modern crime. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, crime didn't slow down, it just got flashier. Piracy exploded across the seas, especially in the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and coastal Europe. Pirates didn't just steal gold and rum, they hijacked entire ships, took hostages, looted cargo holds full of textiles, spices, or weapons, and burned the leftovers. Some captains were ex-Navy, others were runaways or mercenaries. Pirate crews followed their own strange codes. If you stole from your shipmates, you lost an ear. If you deserted in battle, you might be marooned on an island with a pistol and one shot. Meanwhile, on land, highwaymen became legends and nightmares all at once. These weren't just back alley thieves, they were mounted, armed, and often dressed better than the people they robbed. They waited along roadsides and jumped carriages carrying rich merchants or government officials. The best ones timed it just right, striking between towns and disappearing into nearby woods or safe houses. Some worked in pairs or small groups, signaling each other with lanterns or whistles. They stole coins, jewelry, documents, and sometimes even the horses. Travelers carried weapons, but it rarely helped. Organized smuggling networks also started growing fast. Coastal communities became hotspots for smuggled silk, tobacco, brandy, and tea. Smugglers carved secret coves into cliffside villages, bribed local sheriffs, and even hired children as lookouts. Some towns survived almost entirely on illegal trade. Fake walls, underground tunnels, and trapdoors were used to hide goods from tax collectors. In some places, entire church congregations helped unload ships under cover of night. Authorities knew crime was everywhere, but enforcement was messy. Local watchmen were often unpaid or drunk, and many simply ignored crimes if the victim wasn't wealthy. Thieves and killers could go town to town without being recognized. That changed when London created the Bow Street Runners in the 1740s. They weren't full police yet, but they were close. They tracked criminals, made arrests, and collected evidence. Some even traveled across counties to hunt suspects. They weren't always effective, but they were a start. City crime was climbing fast too. Urban theft, shoplifting, and street scams were constant. Pickpockets worked in teams, with one distracting and another grabbing the goods. Confidence tricksters sold fake cures, forged letters, or ran gambling setups with rigged dice. The growth of cities made it easier to vanish into the crowd. Murders happened more often in alleyways or behind inns, especially after dark. Many criminals slipped through gaps in the system, moving freely thanks to poor communication and bribed officials. Crime in this era had style, strategy, and a growing network. It wasn't random. It was organized, dangerous, and smart enough to stay one step ahead. Industrial age. Crime. As cities exploded in size during the 1700s and 1800s, so did the number of people who saw crime as a career move. Urban life brought factories, tenements, and overcrowded slums, which also meant more poverty, more desperation, and more opportunities to steal. Street crime became a daily grind. Thieves operated in alleys, at train stations, or outside factories. Pickpocketing was an actual job title in some circles. Children were recruited young, trained to snatch purses and disappear into the smoke. Organized gangs started to form across industrial cities. In London, the St. Giles Rooks and 40 Thieves worked districts like professionals. They had lookouts, fences, and specific targets. In New York, early gangs like the Bowery Boys clashed with rivals over turf and protection rackets. These groups controlled neighborhoods, intimidated witnesses, and even paid off local police. Fraud wasn't subtle either. Con artists set up fake charities, ran forged lottery tickets, or tricked immigrants into paying for jobs that didn't exist. Counterfeit money spread fast in crowded markets. Prostitution became widespread in growing cities, especially near factories and docks. Brothels operated out of homes, inns, and upper rooms of taverns. Many were controlled by pimps or madams who used debt, addiction, or outright threats to keep women working. Police mostly ignored it unless a high-profile scandal broke out, and even then, bribes usually handled it. In places like Paris, London, and New York, sex work was woven into the nightlife. It was illegal on paper, but everywhere in practice. Some crime went big. Jesse James, a Confederate guerrilla-turned-robber, led a gang that knocked over banks and trains across the American Midwest. He became a folk legend and escaped capture for years by moving between safe houses and sympathizers. His crimes were violent, and some robberies ended in shootouts with innocent people caught in the crossfire. In England, Jack the Ripper haunted Whitechapel in the late 1880s, killing at least 5 women and sending letters to the press that taunted police. His murders shocked the public and exposed just how poorly urban law enforcement handled organized violence. No one was ever caught. Early versions of mafias also started forming. In Sicily, family-based criminal groups took over rural protection duties, then expanded into blackmail and extortion. These proto-mafias offered security for a fee, and if someone refused to pay, buildings mysteriously caught fire. Industrial growth made cities louder, darker, and more anonymous, perfect for crime to evolve. Criminals blended into crowds, used factories for cover, and turned chaos into strategy. The age of petty thieves gave way to professional crime, backed by networks, weapons, and reputations that made them more feared than the law itself. Prohibition and gangster era. When the government banned alcohol in the 1920s, criminals popped champagne. Bootlegging became the fastest way to get rich, and everyone from small-time crooks to career criminals jumped in. They smuggled liquor across borders, brewed it in basements, and ran entire distilleries out of farms, warehouses, and sometimes churches. Speakeasies, hidden bars behind fake walls, phone booths, or back alleys popped up in every major city. Some were simple rooms with a piano. Others were decked out with velvet, jazz bands, and crooked cops guarding the door. The liquor business built empires. Criminal groups bought politicians, bribed law enforcement, and used their profits to buy guns, cars, and more influence. They didn't just control alcohol. They ran gambling rings, loan sharking operations, and unions. Violence became the business model. Rival gangs fought bloody turf wars, hijacked shipments, and murdered witnesses. Cars got armor. Gunfights became common in the streets. Al Capone made Chicago his personal playground. He ran an empire of bootlegging, gambling, and racketeering. Capone controlled the police, paid off judges, and crushed rivals with brutal efficiency. His gang used Tommy guns, bombs, and ambushes to wipe out competition. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929 left 7 men dead and made headlines across the country. Capone still showed up in public wearing designer suits and acting like a local celebrity. The law finally got him, not for murder, but for tax evasion. Meanwhile, in New York, Lucky Luciano was setting up something much bigger. He reorganized the Italian-American crime world into a national network. Instead of random gangs fighting constantly, Luciano pushed for structure. He formed a commission of bosses, divided territories, and enforced peace. Not because he was noble, but because peace meant profit. This was the foundation of what later became known as the American Mafia. Luciano's syndicate ran prostitution rings, gambling halls, and smuggling routes. He even partnered with Jewish and Irish mobsters, breaking the old ethnic boundaries that used to divide criminal groups. Everything was about efficiency. If someone got in the way, they disappeared. Prohibition made crime look glamorous, but the violence was relentless. Gangsters bombed storefronts, gunned people down on busy streets, and bribed their way into every layer of local government. Courts were overwhelmed, police were underpaid, and juries were scared silent. By the time alcohol was legalized again in 1933, organized crime had already moved into drugs, unions, and corporate fraud. Crime didn't end when the booze came back, it just changed focus. Prohibition gave criminals the power, the money, and the structure to run cities from the shadows. The gangsters weren't just robbing banks, they were becoming businessmen with bullets. Post-war crime boom. After the Second World War, economies were rebuilding, cities were growing, and criminals were upgrading. Black markets had exploded during the war, and they didn't just vanish when peace came. Everything from rationed food and medicine to stolen war supplies was sold through underground networks. In some places, army surplus became criminal gold. People sold fake ration books, hoarded gasoline, and moved stolen goods between cities using fake documents and bribed officials. The mob didn't slow down either. In fact, it expanded. Crime families that had been regional before the war started working together across state lines. They moved into construction, trucking, garbage collection, and the garment industry. Bribes, threats, and favors bought them contracts and city influence. Bookmaking and gambling dens popped up in cities like Cleveland, Boston, and Kansas City, all feeding profits into larger operations. Mobsters backed nightclubs, restaurants, and even entertainment businesses, using them to launder money and host meetings. Heists started getting more ambitious. Criminals weren't just robbing banks anymore, they were planning. Armed crews stole payroll trucks, hijacked armored cars, and drilled into safes inside department stores and hotels. These weren't smash and grabs. They used blueprints, inside information, and timed their jobs with military precision. In 1950, a crew in Boston stole over $2 million in cash from a counting house. One of the largest robberies in American history at that point, white-collar crime quietly surged alongside the street stuff. Fraud, embezzlement, insider trading. It all grew as businesses expanded after the war. Executives skimmed money off payrolls, cooked the books, and used shell companies to hide profits. Unlike street thugs, these criminals wore suits and hosted charity events. Some operated through fake investment schemes, offering fake bonds or certificates to investors who never saw their money again. Espionage also exploded during the Cold War. Spying wasn't just a military thing, it became a criminal enterprise. Individuals sold secrets to foreign governments, moved classified documents through diplomatic bags, or used hidden cameras to capture restricted information. Some double agents took bribes, others acted out of ideology, but both ended up on trial or quietly vanished. There were major cases in the United States and Europe where scientists, soldiers, and even embassy staff got caught trading secrets for cash, protection, or promises of new identities. This era blurred the line between crime and business. Street gangs were being replaced by networks. Heists were becoming high-tech. Criminals stopped relying on brute force and leaned into planning, partnerships, and politics. The violence didn't disappear. It just dressed better, shook hands with city officials, and bought vacation homes with stolen money. Crime had officially gone corporate. Serial killer era. In the 1970s and 1980s, murder wasn't just happening more often. It was happening methodically, obsessively, and without warning. Serial killing surged across the United States and beyond, and the public couldn't look away. Killers weren't robbing banks or starting turf wars. They were hunting strangers. The randomness terrified people. Victims were often picked just for being in the wrong place, and the killers didn't hide the horror. They wanted attention. The Zodiac Killer sent cryptic letters and ciphers to newspapers, mocking police and hinting at future murders. He claimed dozens of victims, though only a handful were confirmed. He was never caught. Ted Bundy moved across state lines, charming his way into people's lives, then attacking with shocking brutality. He escaped custody more than once, and during one of those escapes, he murdered multiple women in a single night. Jeffrey Dahmer lured men back to his apartment where the crimes went beyond murder into pure horror. He admitted everything when finally caught, but for years he operated in plain sight. John Wayne Gacy buried bodies under his house while performing as a clown at children's parties. David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York by shooting couples in parked cars and claiming a demon dog told him to do it. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, broke into homes in California, killing and assaulting people at random, leaving behind pentagrams and taunting law enforcement through the media. What made this era so terrifying wasn't just the killers, it was how poorly law enforcement could track them. Many operated across state lines, changing patterns or going silent for long stretches. Police departments didn't communicate with each other. Crime scenes weren't shared across jurisdictions. By the time a pattern was noticed, more people were dead. Victims were often marginalized as sex workers, runaways, or people living alone, which meant cases were overlooked or deprioritized. That chaos pushed the government to finally create something new. The Behavioral Science Unit inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation started studying patterns, interviewing convicted killers, and building psychological profiles to help catch them faster. Agents sat down with murderers to ask how they picked victims, what triggered the killings, and what clues they left behind. This wasn't just guessing, it was detailed analysis, crime scene breakdowns, and matching behavior to motive. Profiling didn't always work, but it gave investigators new tools. They started recognizing patterns in victim types, geographic movement, and signature behaviors. Killers were now being hunted with psychology, not just fingerprints. The media played a huge role too. Nicknames like the Green River Killer or the Hillside Stranglers turned criminals into horrifying household names. The public obsession only grew. Crime in this era wasn't about money or revenge. It was obsession, control, and infamy. The killers were calculating, mobile, and in some cases, invisible, until someone noticed the pattern too late. Cartel and drug war era. In the 1980s and 1990s, the cocaine trade transformed crime into an international war zone. Colombia became the epicenter, and Pablo Escobar turned it into his personal empire. His Medellin cartel smuggled thousands of tons of cocaine into the United States every year, hidden in everything from coffee shipments to airplane parts. The money was impossible to miss. Escobar paid off judges, bought politicians, and handed out cash in poor neighborhoods to gain support. But if someone said no, they didn't stay alive for long. Assassinations weren't subtle. Judges were blown up, police chiefs were gunned down in traffic. A commercial airliner was bombed just to kill one man. Escobar ran the country's underworld so thoroughly, some called him the unofficial president. In cities like Medellin, murder became a daily routine. His cartel had its own army, including teenage hitmen who carried out executions for a few $100s. But the violence didn't stop at the border. In the United States, cities like Miami and Los Angeles turned into drug battlegrounds. Cocaine flooded neighborhoods. fueling gang wars and drive-by shootings. Crack cocaine hit hard in low-income areas, and local dealers fought for every block. Law enforcement cracked down, but corruption and underfunding made it impossible to keep up. The streets were packed with money, guns, and fear. The Drug Enforcement Administration ramped up its operations during this time, pushing into Latin America with surveillance, sting operations, and high-level arrests. They partnered with military units and trained foreign forces, targeting cartel leaders through wiretaps, informants, and extradition deals. Some efforts worked, others sparked even more bloodshed. The cartels adapted quickly, shifting routes through Mexico and developing more brutal tactics. That shift opened the door for the Mexican cartels. Groups like the Guadalajara cartel started as transporters for Colombian cocaine, but soon built their own networks. When Colombian cartels lost power, the Mexicans took control. Drug corridors stretched across the US-Mexico border, protected by bribes and bullets. Cities like Ciudad Juarez and Tijuana turned into war zones, with bodies left hanging from bridges and messages carved into walls. Entire police forces quit after being targeted. In the United States, the drug war turned federal. New laws brought harsher sentences and prisons filled up fast, but violence kept rising. Gangs in cities like Chicago and New York grew richer through cartel partnerships. Some law enforcement units were caught skimming money from drug raids. Trust collapsed. The cartel era wasn't just about smuggling drugs. It was about dominating countries, buying power, and silencing opposition with terror. Crime went global, fueled by addiction, money, and endless supply chains. And the body count didn't stop climbing. Cybercrime and white-collar boom. In the 2000s and 2010s, crime got smarter, faster, and invisible. Computers opened a new battlefield, and cybercrime spread like wildfire. Identity theft became a global epidemic. Hackers broke into databases, stole credit card numbers, and sold personal info on black markets. Some ran phishing scams with fake websites or emails that tricked people into handing over logins and banking info. Others cracked corporate systems and emptied accounts in hours. Entire networks were breached without setting foot in a building. Hacking groups formed their own underground communities. Some ran ransomware attacks, locking victims' files and demanding payment in cryptocurrency. Others targeted governments, stealing classified documents or disabling infrastructure. Data became a weapon. Hospitals, schools, and police departments were all hit. The tools kept improving: keyloggers, trojans, brute force software. And most people didn't even know they were targets until money was already gone. White-collar crime also hit its peak. Executives faked numbers, misled investors, and built companies on lies. Enron collapsed after using fake partnerships and hidden debt to boost stock prices. Employees lost pensions, investors lost billions, and top executives ended up behind bars. The fallout exposed how much manipulation was buried behind corporate spreadsheets. Then came Bernie Madoff. His Ponzi scheme ran for decades, promising steady returns while secretly using new investors' money to pay old ones. There were no real profits. He stole tens of billions of dollars from individuals, charities, and universities. Some victims lost everything. His arrest in 2008 shocked the financial world and proved just how easy it was to fool regulators with charm and paperwork. Meanwhile, crime moved on to the dark web. The Silk Road became the black market of the internet. It offered drugs, fake documents, weapons, and even hitman listings. Payments were made with cryptocurrency, and users logged in through anonymous browsers. It ran for years before the founder was finally caught. Even then, copycats sprang up immediately. Digital marketplaces replaced alleyway deals. You didn't need a gang, just a screen and some code. Bank fraud also surged. Criminals used bots to test stolen cards online, ran scams through fake charities, or moved money between shell companies across multiple countries. Financial institutions scrambled to keep up, investing in cyber defense teams and fraud detection systems, but they couldn't stop everything. The more secure systems became, the more creative criminals got. This era didn't need guns or getaway cars. The crime came through emails, fake apps, and invisible code. It was clean, global, and devastating. Billion-dollar frauds, massive data leaks, and digital black markets reshaped how crime looked, acted, and spread, and most of it happened without a single fingerprint. Modern crime. In the 2020s, crime didn't vanish. It just got faster, more anonymous, and way harder to stop. Online fraud skyrocketed. Scammers used deepfake videos, fake investment platforms, and social media impersonation to steal millions. Romance scams weren't just messages from strangers anymore. People got tricked into long-term fake relationships that drained their bank accounts. Fake job offers, phishing links, and crypto wallet traps were everywhere. The internet became a minefield, and people clicked without knowing they were handing over their life savings. Ransomware attacks evolved into one of the biggest threats to businesses and governments. Criminals didn't just lock files, they leaked them if victims refused to pay. Hospitals, school districts, shipping companies, and even entire cities were held hostage by code. Payments were demanded in cryptocurrency, usually through obscure wallets that left no trail. Some groups offered ransomware as a service. Anyone could buy the tools, launch an attack, and split the profit. Cryptocurrency scams exploded. Rug pulls, where developers hyped a fake coin and then vanished, drained millions from investors who thought they were getting in early. Fake exchanges popped up, promising high returns and disappearing overnight. Criminals also used crypto to wash money, move payments, and hide stolen funds. Some coins were designed purely for laundering. Investigators could barely keep up. Organized retail theft became a full-scale operation. This wasn't just shoplifting. Crews used stolen vehicles, coordinated tactics, and overwhelmed stores with speed. They hit multiple locations in a day, grabbing high-value items like electronics, designer clothes, and beauty products. Some used stolen IDs to create fake return scams, flipping items for clean cash. Others sold everything online within hours. Stores responded with locked cases, private security, and surveillance. But the thefts kept growing. Cyber terrorism became more than a buzzword. Hackers targeted infrastructure, pipelines, power grids, and transportation systems, either to cause chaos or prove they could. State-sponsored groups tested weaknesses, launched cyber attacks across borders, and infected networks with dormant malware. In some cases, entire countries lost communication or access to services for days. These weren't lone wolves in basements. They were trained teams funded and protected by governments with global ambitions. Then came artificial intelligence. Criminals used AI to generate fake voices for phone scams, automate phishing, and crack passwords with machine learning. Deepfakes were used to bypass facial recognition or impersonate executives in video calls. Chatbots were hijacked to spread disinformation, and scammers used language models to write convincing fake messages at scale. AI became both a tool and a weapon, changing how fast and how wide crime could spread. Modern crime doesn't need a gun. It needs a signal, a screen, and a plan. It's invisible, constant, and almost always a few steps ahead. Congrats on making it to the end. If you like this video, please show your support by smashing that like and subscribe button.